Which one?
It says BioCarry dataset.
Okay. Yeah, just want to make sure I shared the right monitor. It's like, okay, well. Okay, so Yuling has been working with the CEDAR team in terms of creating a template, and so one goes to the site, and this is sort of an overview of the template form. It basically goes over some of the core data set metadata elements, so like the data set ID, the title, description. There's for the data type. Again, this is something that we need to finalize. Sort of data type information. This is something we've been working on with Philippe, and so I know this is one section that has to be updated because we've been talking about that on the reconciliation calls.
Hey, Jeff.
Sort of the simple fields, right?
Hey, Jeff.
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is it possible to go full screen on that display?
Let's see, full screen for me.
So if you just go and present, Jeff, on the right-hand top.
Yeah, we'll probably jump to my other screen then, and then.
Oh, okay.
Okay, not to worry. That's whatever you can do.
Oh wait,
hey.
Usually you can slide this thing over, but there's no way in PowerPoint I can't seem to minimize that. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And so these are some of the simple fields. We've also been creating sort of these multi-instance elements. So for the data distribution information, each you can have a distribution. You can have multiple of these, and this also has some of the data distribution elements. Whoops, sorry, elements within it. And so we've done sort of the core elements, the data set distribution information, the access type. So this is the editing page for the access type. So we have the access types also as a separate element, and then the which fills into this access type box here. So you can create these lists. And this is the access, then download URL, the authentication types, which is another one of the lists that we're using. So we've implemented sort of a core, a subset of the core elements, and the question is to build this out. Do we want more than sort of the base core elements? And then the other question is, and this is more on the CEDAR side, I don't think there's the ability yet to have sort of parts of the form that show up if someone selects some other element, sort of like with some of the surveys where sort of you have pieces of the survey that pop up if you answer a certain question a certain way.
Unfortunately, no, not yet. That's obviously, if you drive that, we could do it. It's on our sort of path at some point, but not in the next month or so. But
right.
Yeah, definitely important for us too, I think.
Because this gets to how we want to sort of build out this form, because I don't think we want to show people a form that's 20 pages long.
Yeah.
And so in this first pass, we could have like the core information, the data distribution, and the access information. And so I don't know if that's Philippe, Alejandra, and others. What should we do as a first pass, and then once we have the ability to sort of turn on certain parts of the form based on user selection, then we could always implement other sort of extensions.
Do you have good examples or use cases of what those paths would be in terms of showing something if X is selected? Do you have maybe anything describing what those would be?
Yeah, so these are, so we have a number of sort of extended parts of the metadata model.
All right,
so Philippe,
okay.
Philippe, I thought I heard you, or Alejandro, I heard you on the call, right?
Yes, we are here.
So I don't know if you wanted to describe some of the extended elements, sort of the study information and all that, or.
Well, yes, but because these elements are very aligned with the CDAR model anyway. So I guess that in the example that you're showing about the access type, for instance, we would need value sets for these control vocabulary, and this would require some discussions or alignments about which values we want to add, even though we already have that from the work that Georgia has been doing. So yes, what exactly do you want us to fill in?
No, it's like the decision points, as in if you select X, you show a subform Y or whatever. Are there examples of those? Because as Jeff said, you don't want to show 20 pages with all possible values displayed or all possible fields. You want to show subsections of the form based on some criteria, and I'm just wondering what those criteria are, I guess.
Well, I was sort of thinking, Philippe, along the lines of, if there's certain study information, because that could then potentially load sort of a form to bring in the study information. Because you have if you have citations for the data set, then you load that sort of citation information.
Right. We could have such conditional forms to bring up specific templates for grant information, publication, maybe instruments, and study design layouts. That these could be individual CDAR templates that could be, in a way, wired together in a specific form. I'd say that's the spirit of CDAR, basically, to have the compositional facility to do so.
I think adding to that, I think it would be useful to show initial. Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, sorry. I thought it would be useful to show initially the compulsory elements. So, in a way, the entities that are more important, like the ones that Jeff included. But yes, it would be good to have the option for those users that are interested in the other elements to be included as well.
Yeah, the reason I'm drilling on this is we'd like to sort of a use case, because other people have asked for similar things, but I just wonder if, for example, you're filling in a form and you select X for one of the drop-downs, and based on selecting that, then you show the protocol part of the form or something like that. I was just looking for specific examples if you have them. If you don't, it doesn't matter so much.
Another example scenario, which is a very different implementation, is if you want to present them with a bunch of folded up things that they could pick one and have it unfold. And that's more a view presentation kind of scenario where the content is there, but it's just a matter of bringing it into view.
Well, the one thing that you can think of is the distinction between a data set that would be a collection of records or just a study, for instance. These are the two kind of things that we have found in DATS that cover different kind of repository, and inherently there would be slightly different requirements for reporting this information. In a case where we have a study that would necessarily condition bringing up a lot more information.
Uh-huh.
So that, in my eyes, that would be one scenario that we could definitely work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a simple way of looking at it is just, if you answer this question one way, then skip to question whatever. You skip a bunch of questions. So you could either show or hide the element that has all those questions, or you could actually just skip to, if you answer no, I have no study data, then you skip over that and you don't even see it at all.
Yeah, those sort of things we're interested in. Yeah, to just a few examples of those, because we don't have those at the moment, but lots of people are mentioning them in different contexts, so having good driving examples would help.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yes, and in addition to that, maybe it would be like a set of initial questions, like if it is a study-based data set, then it means you need to show the study component. Otherwise, it might not be necessary. And so maybe it's, it's the kind of conditional according to the value as Deborah mentioned, but also could be these other use cases.
Yep.
Yes, correct. We have that on our list, and if that was a high priority, we'd push it higher on our list.
Yeah. So what would your next? I guess what would your next steps or your planned next steps? With this sort of was a proof of concept, I guess. Do you have any?
This is proof
like
of concept,
or,
and then the question is, what is the sort of the minimal? This is a question more for sort of the development team and Philippe and Alejandra. By not overwhelming the user, what are some of the additional pieces of information that we should potentially add to this sort of as a first pass? Because again, showing someone a 20-page form never goes over well.
That's true.
Because we have some of the core attributes, we have the distribution information, we have the access information.
Do we have publication information, Jeff?
We hadn't added publication information. This is for publication information for the data set, not the citation information, right?
I guess I'm thinking both. What do you mean by not for citation? I'm thinking, I guess, of any kind of a paper that describes the data set.
Yeah, so that's the citation of the data set itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could definitely add that.
Because I think that's something that's of interest from what we understand.
But would it be in the form just kind of graduation, a gradient, like do you have a PubMed ID, do you have a DOI? If yes, we pull the information from those services, and if not, then people would have to
ask them to enter it in.
Yeah.
That again could be conditional, right? You can ask them where it is. If they have a PubMed ID, then they just enter that.
I think we could ask them for the PubMed ID or DOI. Not sure it can be conditional like that. Not yet, at least.
And the other thing that seems to be fairly high up in the list of priorities, I think we've got an issue. I know you just assigned that one. Is the grant identifier and the funding agencies for credit.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And that would be fairly prominent request or thing to capture.
Right.
So do you have any, for any of these fields, are there like validation services necessarily? Like for example, the grant ID, are you just happy to accept that and assume it's correct, or are there any cases where you have fields that you will actually go to an external web service, for example, and say, okay, is this field valid? Ignoring the control term field, but for other field types, or is that not a use case necessarily for the moment?
For the publication information, it would be a use case because if we had PubMed ID or we had a DOI, we could actually validate that it was
real.
That was real.
Yeah. Okay. But not too many others yet that you can think of.
Well, for grants, for NIH-based grants, we have actually been pulling information from eReporter, right? They have an API service.
eReporter, okay.
No. No, they don't have API yet, but we've downloaded the data, so we still could. But then we need an API for them to validate it. right?
We could also leverage the Crossref API for funding agencies or funding which have been registered or recognized by Crossref.
Crossref?
Crossref.
Crossref, okay. Okay.
I will send the link later on.
That'll be good, thanks.
So actually, when you go into NCBI, into my NCBI, if you put in a PubMed ID or any other information for a publication, they have a pop-up window coming in and asking, is this the publication that you are, is this a correct publication or something like that.
Uh-huh.
I guess it would be useful to have that kind of validation in there.
And maybe even display the title and a few other things in the form itself, just to make it clear what's been entered. Yeah, okay, that's useful to know. Again, these external web services have come up for us in different contexts as use cases as well for many different areas. That's why I was asking. So it's something, again, it's on our to-do list. It's a question of where on the to-do list it is.
So what is your what would you like to achieve with this effort between now and November? Do you have a particular deliverable in mind beyond what we're talking about so far?
I mean, I'm on my end. I mean, what I'd like to see is some form, that is accessible to users, who might be dropping data sets, for example. Maybe the Commons will be running then. So a way for, researchers who have sort of one-off data sets that aren't going into a repository to sort of register them. And, at that, it could be, the more simple form to begin with, if the sort of the conditional isn't available yet. The only thing that we'd have to figure out is, how would we get the data from you? So is there a way to sort of, pull certain form information, from a specific template, or if that is something that you push or you can push, or we'd have to figure out how to sort of build the interface between what you're collecting.
Yeah, that wouldn't be too hard in the sense that you basically could make a REST call to ask for all instances of a particular template. The template being the BioCali template, for example,
right. And
that will return a ball of a set of JSON objects, which are pretty straightforward. So you'd have to write some conversion code from that JSON to whatever your format is. But as I said, it's a pretty simple format that comes out of these forms. The forms themselves are fairly complex, but the actual instances are basic JSON fields and objects. It's quite straightforward. So the simplest use case would be you could make a daily call to get new instances created in the last 24 hours of this template, for example, and you would get back an array of JSON objects that you'd have to write some code, which would be pretty straightforward code to write, I think, to convert it into, I don't know, your JSON or your relational database or however you store it internally.
Yeah, and we store it as JSON as well.
Okay. So it might be very close because we've intentionally made the JSON quite simple from these forms. So it might not be very much manipulation going on, I would suspect.
I think Philippe may have even looked into that.
Yes, Alex and myself have been mapping the two things, so we are very closely aligned, as we pointed out. So the mapping is on the way.
Yeah, good. Well, go ahead.
There's one other technical thing, I guess, that would need to make that work in the sense that how would the redirection happen? I mean, so if you want to go to Cedar, you have to create an account, which is pretty easy. You have single sign-on with Facebook or whatever, GitHub. So somebody would have to go, I guess you direct them to Cedar, to a particular template. They'd have to create a login, and then they'd fill in the forms. And then, as I said, you could have this disconnected thing where you just scrape the REST API. every night or whenever to get the latest instances of those forms. I don't know if that's enough for a proof of concept. It's very sort of a handoff to Cedar, and then somebody needs to log in. And as I said, logging in is pretty quick, but you still need to create an account.
Right.
But that could work that way, I guess. It could be a very simple web redirect to the form, and they register, and then they get brought to the instance, and they fill it in. I mean, would that work as an initial test case, I guess?
I think so. I mean, it just requires the user to log. I mean,
yeah. I mean, if we were clever, we could. I guess there's no login to your system per se, or is there? Obviously, it's not necessary to log in to use BioCaddy or DataMed.
It's not required, but you can.
Okay.
So we have a DataMed login, or we're using Google. We are allowing people to log in with their Google accounts.
Uh-huh.
If they want to save searches and such.
But they don't have to log in, I guess.
They don't have to, though. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
You'll accept anonymous data or anonymous metadata?
Not for submissions.
Right. So if they're going to do a submission, then they will likely be logged. I don't know that we need to do this for a demonstration, but I think it is useful to start exploring if we could share our login schemes, processes, whatever, to see if it would be easy if they're logged into your system, if they can just get into our system with the same login on the fly, as it were.
Or maybe you don't care about that level of seamlessness initially, or not.
Yeah, but don't need to do it for the demo in any case.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Maybe, but there are options at least. But okay. But that's, I mean,
for Cedar, you're allowing them to log in with GitHub.
Yeah, GitHub or Facebook, a bunch of other things I can't remember. We're using Keycloak, which is a third-party tool for managing logins. It's really good, actually. So yeah, Google, Facebook, GitHub, Twitter.
It may even be able to handle that single sign-on. Keycloak maybe. It's worth looking as sort of a technical action item to what extent the tool we're using may enable single sign-on across multiple systems.
Yeah, we can get that. You can look at that when you get that.
Yeah.
So can you send over maybe if it's possible a little bit of information, or at least the name of the tool, so we'll look at it also from our end?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sure, we'll do that.
But I don't know what you've done for your system, but certainly Keycloak has worked very well for us because we didn't want to get into the business of writing our own authentication service. So it might be useful for you too, perhaps. I don't know.
Is it compatible, just out of curiosity, with NIH login?
No. Or with what's the European Orbit? Not Orbix, but Orchid. It's not. Doesn't allow Orchid either, unfortunately.
Too bad. Okay. No, just I was checking because I've got my NCBI account, and I was just wondering if that could be also a kind of a nice feature to have.
It definitely would, and Orchid 2 would be nice, probably.
Yeah. Interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Good.
At least 6 months ago when we looked, it didn't have that, but we can look again. But yeah. But there may be ways of extending it, which we probably would be interested in doing, because obviously having that type of institutional access would even be nicer from our point of view.
Thanks.
So, can we identify this as a goal then to pursue, to have something that is working at least in a prototype form by the BD2K meeting in November?
Yes, I mean that's what I would look for. Yeah.
Cool. That would be great. Sign us up.
Yeah.
For something.
So I think we can make the final edits to the base form, and then we can work with you in terms of getting the data. We can also share Yuling, we can share we can just share the form.
The template?
Yeah, the template for to gain access to the main form for entering information. We can we can send you that link.
Okay.
It said there's no sharing.
So John,
I'm not sure if I'll-
is the seeded UI live now?
There's no way.
It's live all the time, but it's not officially released. But you can use it, yeah. The main machine is permanently live.
Okay.
Decision to.
No.
Okay.
So can you send us a link?
So for sharing the form, is there anything specific we have to do, or?
We might have to do some twiddling on our end because our permission system isn't quite robust yet. We're doing an official release in mid-September, but we can hack something together by the end of the week when one of our developers comes back to make it a shareable link.
Okay. No, that'd be good. Because then we can share it with the rest of the.
Yeah.
The
So
developers.
we'll deal with that and send it out either Monday or probably Friday or Monday, so that everybody can see it. At the moment, you have to log into the Uling probably to actually see it, so which is not useful. So we'll send that out.
So this is pretty exciting and appealing for us, I think, to really have more of this live interaction and interface. So it sounds like Jeff and Martin are going to be fairly tightly coupled in terms of continuing to move the process along and identify things that need to be resolved, technical issues that need to be resolved.
Yes, and I mean Yuling is the one that's been working with the tools.
Yes.
So
Yes. We would like to ask, if she hasn't already, would it be possible for her to work with us to fill out the evaluation and maybe even have a side chat of, I think she's already talked to Deborah once or twice, but if there's any additional feedback, we would really love to collect that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. If you can send me the link of the survey or any questionnaire, I would like to help you complete it.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure will. And we will, the system that is live at cedar.metadatacenter.net is going to get regular upgrades, including one as soon as today, we hope. So the people who have accounts on the user's mail list, and that should include Yuling. I added everybody who had an account on Cedar just in this past week. We'll get notification when the new release gets put up online so that they're not too shocked when they go to access it.
But it's usable now.
Yeah, it's usable now, and the new release is mostly just plain UI modifications, and it's not radically different. It's improvements in various areas, but nothing scary.
Okay. So I guess you can get on with the rest of your agenda, perhaps, unless there's anything more you want to talk to us about.
I was going to ask Jeff if there was anything else that we had to discuss.
I mean, for the Cedar template, I mean, I think the main thing is getting the shareable link so that we can then, share it with you guys in Houston and Oxford, and Hyun Yee's group, and then we can make final edits to the form. And once we have that, we can then basically turn around and try entering some data, and then getting the data from their system, to see what we're getting. So
in the next 2 to 3 weeks, our permissions model will become a lot more palatable. Right now, it's extremely limited. And so depending on the kinds of sharing and whether we're sharing just templates or the instances also, we may get to a point where it just makes sense to wait for a couple days until the permission models are updated in the final system, in the production system. So just, if you don't mind being prepared to play that by ear a little bit, if we run into a stoppage, it shouldn't last very long, but we may just find it'll be easier to wait at some point. For now, let's try this path and see if we can achieve all the needs you have for working with the data.
And we'll send you some examples of we can do some dummy filling in of the data and send you examples of the output JSON just to give you a sense of how straightforward it is too. So you can still do an evaluation of how easy it will be to transfer that JSON to yours very, very easily too. So I'll send you something there as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Very exciting. Appreciate it. I'll go ahead and hang on the line. I think Martin and Deborah will take off, but I'll listen in if you don't mind.
Sure.
Great.
So I guess action item wise, we are going to finalize the CEDAR template. We're going to have some examples of the JSON documents, right? That could come.
Yeah, the first is to get the the shareable links so that we can share the template with everyone.
Okay.
To give feedback, and then we'll finalize based on feedback, and then after that we can start getting data. So it probably won't be until September, mid later September, where we'll actually start pulling some data. Because we'll probably go around with a template for a while. So it probably fits in with your timeline of the permissions as well.
I guess in parallel, I think we should look at the single login that Martin was talking about. So maybe that's something that we could also look at, John.
What's the name of that again?
That's called Keycloak, KEYCLOAK. And you can see it in action just by logging on to CEDAR, just by going to CEDAR if you haven't logged on before. Right now we haven't. You can customize the front end. We haven't quite done that, but in a week or two it'll be a more CEDAR-ish front end that's using Keycloak.
Okay. So I guess we will look into that too. And then
we'll get you that information.
All right. Thanks so much.
You bet.
So if there's no more in terms of the CEDAR template and other CEDAR issues, maybe Tess, we can move on to the next.
Yep. I'll move my next presentation in. See, with PowerPoint, I can actually minimize those bars. So, okay, so I'll start again with sort of the high-level overview slide, just to sort of again walk people through. But we sort of have the pipeline itself relies on JSON documents within Mongo. So we first do the extraction of data from a data resource, and at this point, I mean, we can pull in everything from OAI PMH, XML, JSON Web Services, CVS, CSV, not the drugstore, but CSV, files, and we also have connectors for FTP and rsync and things like that. So we have a pretty wide number of connectors where we can connect to a data source and pull in the data. So the initial step is that data ingest. The next steps then really focus around sort of the metadata mapping and the enhancement, and this is sort of a loop where there's a transformation process, mapping process, some enhancement process, and at some point it writes it back to the database, and then potentially goes on other loops. And then once a document is prepared, it gets sent out to export, and so we have exporters that write to the local file system and also to Elasticsearch. So I mean, these are the three basic points: the ingestion, the transformation mapping, and the export. The actual architecture of the actual architecture for the handling of documents is a message broker architecture. The reason that we're using this is that we want to be able to scale up the number of, for example, nodes that work on the transformation processes, based on how much data we're potentially pulling in. So if one were to sort of move forward look at a more, production level system, you wouldn't need all the nodes all the time because data repositories don't update, that frequently, and depends on how many documents you're pulling in that are updated. So what happens is that, there's a data from the MongoDB, if a new document is detected, right? So there's a document check for new documents and for sort of change documents. If a document is detected that is new, that has to be processed, it's basically added, through this producer module gets added to a ActiveMQ queue. And depending on what type of process it is, so is it an ingestion, is it a transformation process, is it an enhancement process, it might be placed into different queues. And this is configured within the system itself on how these queues are differentiated. And then the processors on the nodes actually then basically tie into the ActiveMQ operation queues, so they sign up, say that they're available, and then they can start pulling sort of document batches onto the system to process them. And so this is sort of the overall architecture of how sort of a document comes into the system and then gets dispatched into the queue and then gets picked up by an available processing node. And then once the processing node is done, it puts the modified document back in Mongo. And so basically, the Mongo database is sort of the database of record, for the original metadata and then the transform metadata. If the metadata is too large, for example, some of the PDB files, even if you're getting the no-atom files, are still pretty large. Instead of having the actual metadata within the document for a data set, it might be stored into their object store, and then within the metadata document, you'll actually have the identifier for that document in Mongo's GridFS. So any questions so far in terms of the messaging? Is everyone still there?
Yeah. Apparently there are no questions though.
And basically these consumers that operate on the processing nodes, are developed through Consumer Factory. And so basically this is how we've sort of embedded the NLP code. That's basically implemented as a consumer worker, within the code itself. And then, as I mentioned, we have a number of different ingesters that have been developed for different ways of connecting to different data resources. And so, it's possible for anyone to write a different type of consumer on top of the system itself. And the consumer interface has certain functionality that one has to do to basically start up the consumer, to handle the message, the listener, so that can all be taken care of. And then with the ingester, there are a number of other features that have to be implemented. So so it has to have the ability, for example, to page through the data sets, but it handles the stubs that are there handle interaction with the Mongo database, so it makes it a little more straightforward to tie in the data sources. And then sort of the last, if one looks at sort of how these messages work through the code, there's a message queue that the consumer coordinator puts basically is reading the message. if it's an ingestion message, if the queue is looking for ingestions, it will create the harvester, and then we'll go and create the specific, basically launch that specific ingester, and we'll then launch that ingester to ingest the data set. And this is the same as if you had a consumer running. So that's basically the the overview of the workflow. It's not a direct workflow because of these messages are potentially spawned to multiple nodes. So we've been running anywhere from 1 to 3 nodes right now, depending on what we're doing and when. But you could actually have many more nodes running, to sort of satisfy processing demand. So hopefully this is information that you were looking for. Are there any other questions or?
So I have a question, but that's actually before we have the ingestion process.
Right.
We have the transformation. I remember at one phase we were talking about having some kind of a validator which would check during transformation against the metadata model, right?
Oh yes, yeah. So this would be a DATS validator.
Yeah, right.
Right. So this would be something that once with the sort of the 2.1 release, we could develop a validator against DATS itself, so that if a data record comes in, and that would be mainly on the ingester side. On our end would be to validate the DATS, but we'd want to also have a validator that's public, that any repository could test against, right? And so this would be a validator on the BioCaddy site itself that would take a DATS file submitted by a repository and validate it and give back, warnings, errors, and potentially suggestions. Because it's not just if the JSON is well formulated, it's also, do you have enough information, or, is there additional information that you could provide? So you'd want to suggest things like that.
Okay.
And Philippe, that's sort of what you had in mind about the validator, right? That it would sort of do both a structural check, but then also suggest potential metadata, right, for submission.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, it would be probably very useful for newcomers to the system. Also to regularize the input that you would get into DataMed.
So another thing I wanted to ask, and this is something to do with what was discussed at the workshop. I remember that there were some discussions about a machine learning system that would actually help in transformations.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly what was discussed.
So with the initial sort of data sources that we've been doing by hand, one could imagine that once one has a good enough base representation, basically a training set, that one could then, when a new repository comes in, that if it doesn't match one of the standards, so let's say, someone has another OAI, PMH resource, that uses Dublin Core like what Dryad does, right? Mm-hmm. In that case, we already have a mapping, a transformation that we can apply to that new source. Or if, they're using, one of the other, standard formats. But if they don't, we could then compare, sort of what they, sort of field by field or element grouping by element grouping. We'd have to figure out how to do that. We could actually then, using the prior curated mappings, we could then, in a sense, suggest mappings, sort of pre-suggest mappings for the new sources as they come in. But again, this goes away with DATs. If people are submitting DATs, then then we'll have the ability to pull that in directly. So that would be sort of the easiest route, is if someone could, if the resources can actually export in DATs.
Okay. Over there. Any other questions? So if not, thanks, Jeff. The next point of discussion was the technical specification document.
Yeah, I'll send I almost have everything collated, so I'll send the link out today.
Okay.
For feedback.
So, would we want to actually have this on the wiki page along with the repository, because that's what we've done on the UI end?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, it's just that right now the documents were spread across a number of different places, in the repos, and so I've just sort of put it together with a sort of an opening description, just so that it makes a little more sense, instead of getting dropped right into things.
And also, just an FYI, for the SciDataCon with the abstract accepted, there was also a call for a submission of a paper based on the abstract that would undergo peer review, which was an option, but it was discussed briefly at the executive committee, and the actual journal that SciDataCon will have the special issue in is not a great journal and probably doesn't address the audience that we want to reach. So it was kind of suggested that maybe we don't put in a paper at this point of time in that particular journal. So I guess
what journal was that again?
I need to look that up. It was called Research. Let me tell you quickly. But I do know that it's not indexed in PubMed. It's called Data Science Journal. So they plan to have a special collection for the SciDataCon 2016. And the deadline would be 30th September for submission, if we plan to do a paper for that.
Oh, okay. It was the CoData journal. That's right.
Yeah, that's the journal from CoData.
So from where I'm sitting, even though it may be I don't want to say weak, but that's what you're implying, journal, it does represent another outlet for potential outreach. So, if it doesn't take too much work to put something together based on the SciDataCon abstract, it might be worth something to consider.
Sure. I guess another option could be to put together, if you're going to put together something, then we could So one of the things that was suggested was that we could try and target maybe a better distributed journal or a better read journal, if you will.
Yeah, I mean the CoData journal seems to focus more on sort of the data repository, so not the any potential data science topics, but it's really I'm just sort of looking at their articles. So things about data repositories, data publishing, and data quality. So I mean, the question would be, for the UI and stuff like that, there's sort of an app. I mean, where can you sort of put these application notes or papers, right?
Yeah. I guess we could try and do a little bit of research and find out what would be an appropriate journal.
Yeah, and I know that there are a number of domain journals that also have these application notes.
So
the question is, if there are a number of different sort of biomedical domains one wants to target, if there's a set of journals, potentially the question is if one could have sort of a coordinated publication, or it doesn't have to be really coordinated, but a publication across the domain journals with an application note or the application paper.
for bioinformatics applications, websites, software, etc., databases, etc., you have the nucleic acid research. NAR has a special issue that it comes out with, I think in June or July of every year, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct. That one point to make on that one is that it requires some sustainability plan to be considered. Other options could be bioinformatics that has application notes, or BMC bioinformatics, or even database.
Yeah, there's also neuroinformatics. I mean, there's a whole slew of these that have sort of these applications, depending on the community itself.
Actually, I guess Susanna already mentioned that, but for the DATS specifically, we were thinking about scientific data.
Okay. Okay. Besides that, I think we are out of time. This is just the GitHub issues that we have had for this week. We have 67 open and 73 closed, and I think now that Nina's back, we'll probably start looking into the usability issues and then work with closing most of them if possible, or as many of them as possible. We don't.
Once these are sort of triaged, is there? Because as people use this, you're going to have more and more open issues. So maybe we need a third category.
Issues under advisement or something.
Or issues that we're not going to address.
Yeah.
Or out of scope. Because they're technically. I don't know if we would close them or if we would keep them open if they're sort of not on the critical path.
I don't know that we ever talked about it. So far, those that we, especially enhancements that we said are not going to be addressed immediately, but maybe addressed sometime in the future, have been kept open. We haven't closed.
Exactly. So these are not really open issues. They're issues we've reviewed, but are not a priority, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe you need a open, closed, and reviewed.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, the open category would be split into two things, right? It would be the actual open ones, and the ones that are sort of, are
resolved.
So we can think about how to represent that because,
I'm a little concerned with the 29 usability issues here.
So those were all the issues that we went back and tagged as usability issues, or potentially what could be usability issues. They weren't reported as usability issues. A lot of them overlap with bugs and enhancements.
So they're relatively minor, is that?
It varies a lot. Some I think I would consider major. I went through and tried to give a severity rating to all of them. From 0 to 3, with 3 being really.
So the serious ones should be addressed. I mean, what we don't want is to have people look at it and say, this is crap, and go away and tell their friends it's crap. Because they had a usability issue.
Right. I think that's what we plan to do now. We are going to address it.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I don't think we have the time to go over the work. I just also wanted to remind people to deposit the codes in GitHub and get in touch with me if anybody needs access to the GitHub organization. Are there any other issues that need to be discussed? If not, thank you all for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
Thank you very much. It was good for us. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.